They sent bulldozers to tear down my house thinking it was just an eyesore. But they didn't know every brick had been held by 3 generations of American soldiers. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, because when I raised that old flag over the wreckage, the whole neighborhood had no choice but to stop and listen. I arrived home at noon, sun scorching my face, and the first thing I saw wasn't the weathered brown porch roof or the windowsill where my grandfather used to sit with a cigarette. It was a massive yellow bulldozer, lowering its steel blade onto the roof of my house. The sound of splitting wood, shattering dust, and someone shouting orders from beyond the fence. All of it hit me square in the chest without warning. I didn't scream, I didn't run. I walked steady and upright like I'd walked on deployment, straight toward the nearest worker, and asked each word deliberate. "Who gave you permission to destroy this house?" He flinched, removed his headset. "We're following orders. HOA approved it, said the house was abandoned and an eyesore and that they had the right to act for community aesthetics." I didn't argue, I didn't ask again. I pulled out my wallet, retrieved my military ID, still bearing its gold verification seal on the back. A photo of the house now being torn down in front of me, along with the words, "Property of SSG, Nathan H. Price, active duty, verified by Department of Defense." The man froze. I stepped past him into the dust, into what used to be home, through a broken doorway into the room where my father once typed letters from Saigon in 1969, now with half its wall ripped off. I looked around. What was once a house was now wreckage, but it wasn't anonymous wreckage. This house was built by a man who landed on Normandy, preserved by his son, who served in the DMZ in Vietnam, and owned by me, just returned from final deployment in the Middle East. They hadn't just demolished my house. They dishonored 3 generations of men who fought for the flag that flew above this roof I called my grandfather. He's 94, still remembers his unit's number by heart. He arrived in full dress uniform, cane in hand, hair silver, but his right arm still steady enough to salute a pile of rubble. I didn't cry, but my chest, it felt like it cracked open. Not anger, not grief, but something heavier. The heartbreak of watching an heirloom fall, not by enemy fire, but by those claiming to defend community standards. I didn't call the police, I didn't sue yet. Instead, I raised the old metal flagpole still rigged with the pulley from my grandfather's day. I hoisted the weathered American flag my father brought home from war. Then I hammered a wooden sign into the lawn. Handwritten bold, "This is not an abandoned house. This is the home of 3 generations of U.S. servicemen. No loudspeakers, no legal memos." Within 48 hours, people arrived. Veterans, children of soldiers, strangers carrying old medals, wartime keepsakes, even photos of fallen comrades. No one wept. They stood still. And they knew that HOA hadn't just demolished a home. They touched a part of history they had no right to erase. I didn't sue. Not right away. I wanted them to feel the weight of what they'd done before they ever had a chance to defend themselves. In the military, I learned one thing. Never strike until you know exactly where the target stands. So I started with paperwork. I went to the land registry office, requested a full property record for 1176, the house they'd half demolished. The results came back in 20 minutes. Legal owner, Staff Sergeant Nathan H. Price. Ownership confirmed under Department of Defense Service Property. Act Certificate A2239, valid through 2035. I tucked the original into my jacket pocket. Then I walked into the Evergreen Hills HOA office. No appointment, didn't need one. I walked in wearing my dress uniform, not to show off, but because it was the uniform I kept spotless for one purpose: to bury the brothers we lost. The receptionist tried to stop me. "Do you have an appointment?" Answered clear and steady. "I have proof that you just tore down the wrong house, a home owned by 3 generations of U.S. military veterans, and I have a 94-year-old Normandy vet who can verify every photo that used to hang on those walls." She went silent, pointed me to the main office. I walked in, dropped the deed copy on the desk in front of Max Vernon, HOA president, mid-50s, button shirt tie, typing on a laptop. He looked up, gave me the usual polite smile. "I understand why you're upset, but we followed protocol. We received no response after 3 mailed notices to the listed address." I asked flat as steel, "What address did you send them to?" He said, "The residency was marked vacant, so we followed the default mailing procedure." I handed him my military ID. "Is this your default?" I asked. "I was on duty." "That house is registered military property. You had no legal authority. None to touch it without a court order or law enforcement present." He paled but tried to hold form. "We can offer compensation for any losses." I cut him off. "You can't compensate history, but you will face it." Then I left no further words. That night, I called an old friend, now a lead attorney with a statewide Veterans Defense Fund. I didn't ask to sue. I asked for a public hearing. No closed rooms, no legal debates. Just one podium, one microphone, one before and after photo of my home. 3 days later, an invitation went out to every resident in Evergreen Hills Special Community Forum, When Mistakes Touch Memory, the story of a 3-generation veterans home. I didn't know who printed the photos lining the community hall that night. My grandfather saluting my father, typing a war letter. Me holding my son Eli on the front steps. But when I arrived, they were already there. The place was packed. Some brought medals, some brought wartime letters, and when I stepped up to speak, I didn't deliver a speech. I said just one sentence. My house wasn't destroyed because I was wrong. It was destroyed because someone didn't take enough time to learn that what they called abandoned was once defended by men who never abandoned anything. No one clapped, but I saw tears. I saw old hands grip tightly. I saw veterans' wives nod in silence. And I saw Max Vernon sitting in the back, silent. Not arguing, not bowing his head, but I knew that night for the first time he faced something money can't buy back. Honor lost by underestimating the quiet of those who once held the line. The hearing ended without any official resolution. No transcripts, no debates, but something had shifted in the heart of everyone present. That night, I didn't stay long. After my speech, I stepped down and took a seat in the very last row like any other listener. I didn't want anyone to stand because of me. The memories I spoke of weren't meant to be elevated. They needed to be brought home, held and understood in mature, quiet reflection. But just when it seemed everything had settled, a woman stood up. She looked to be in her early 40s, short hair, wearing a plain white shirt, a small silver star pin on her collar. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried, "My name is Lydia Armstrong. I've lived here for 8 years. I've never spoken at any meeting before, and honestly, I used to believe things like this should be left to the law. But tonight I have to speak. My home, 1402, used to belong to my father. He was an infantryman. 25th Division, served in Grenada. He didn't live long enough to see meetings like this. But if he were here, he'd ask, how can an organization justify demolishing a place that holds war memorabilia just because no one from that organization ever bothered to step inside it?" The room went still. She continued, "I don't know Nathan personally, but I know this. If the place I live in can tear down a veteran's house without an apology, then tomorrow they could walk into my home and say the photo of my father is too old and ruins the hallway aesthetic." A few heads nodded, but Lydia wasn't done. "So I say this as a resident, as a veteran's daughter, and as someone who pays HOA fees every month. I demand a public apology from this board, not just to Nathan, but to everyone who's held on to this place through sacrifices that this HOA will never understand." She sat back down. No applause, but dozens of eyes turned in unison toward the HOA board. Max Vernon sat there, lips pressed tightly. Other board members whispered. Some looked down. One was visibly sweating, but none of them spoke. I didn't stand again. I didn't need to win with my hands. I had seen enough. The public had turned, and once memory finds someone willing to stand guard, no policy can erase it. The next day, official notices from the HOA were posted across Evergreen Hills. We acknowledge the unnecessary harm that has occurred, and we extend our deepest apologies to Mr. Nathan H. Price in the veteran community for actions that lacked proper judgment. A late apology, but not a hollow one. I accepted it not because it could undo what was lost, but because from now on, every time they draft a new rule, they will remember. Some walls are not made of concrete. They are built with blood and bone. That afternoon, I returned to the plot where my home once stood, now just foundation and a few skeletal beams. I didn't rebuild right away. I re-raised the flagpole hung beneath it, a wooden sign. This is a soldier's home. If you plan to step in, stop first and ask yourself, where did you step out from? Some people paused to read. Some lowered their heads. One child tugged at his mother's hand and asked, "Mom, what's a soldier?" And she answered, "Someone who made sure you'd have a place to ask that question." 3 days after the public apology notice was posted across the neighborhood, I received the first phone call from a local television station. The woman on the line sounded both earnest and gentle. "We were deeply moved by your story. We'd like to invite you to join the next segment of Living Memory. Just 15 minutes to share your journey and reflections. After what happened, I declined politely but firmly. She asked why. I replied, if someone couldn't already see my grandfather's silence while saluting in front of the rubble as enough, then I have nothing else to add. The next day an email arrived, this time from a state-level veterans organization men I had once served beside shoulder to shoulder in desert nights, hands on each other's backs after memorial services. They wrote, we'd be honored if Staff Sergeant Nathan H. Price would share the story of the house that was torn down but whose memory remained. We believe what you've preserved could become a model for how communities should reflect on sacrifice. I read every word, and again I declined, but this time I wrote a letter in return. In it, I didn't mention myself. I simply wrote, if you wish to tell the story, let Lydia Armstrong speak. Let her share how she felt recalling her father. Let the boy who asked, Mom, what's a soldier, be the voice of what he learned that night. I don't need to stand at a podium for the story to live on. It lives because it's no longer mine to carry alone. I hit send, close my laptop, and walk back outside. A plot of land, a few standing beams, one flagpole. I hadn't rebuilt anything. I hadn't put up fences. Each day, a few people would stop by. Some took photos, some left coins, stones, or folded slips of paper. I didn't clear them. I let them be like layers of sediment so that anyone passing through could touch something and find what they needed. One afternoon, I saw a group of students standing at the edge of the yard wearing history class badges. Their teacher stood nearby holding a printed copy of Lydia's speech. I didn't step in, but one student, thin, curly-haired glasses, turned to me and asked, are you the person in this story? I smiled at maybe. She nodded, then asked, if it's you, why didn't you go on TV? My mom says only famous people get to protect their memories. I sat down beside her, looked her in the eyes, and answered, I don't want my memories protected because I'm famous. I want them protected because they're true. She was quiet for a moment, then wrote something on a piece of paper, folded it, and placed it beneath the flagpole. I didn't open it. I didn't need to, because if she truly understood what she wrote, it would live on even without being broadcast. That night, I added a new line beneath the wooden sign that still bore the old words, all honor needs no microphone. And I knew from that moment on, my story had left my voice. It had entered the memory of others in their own tone, in their own way, and perhaps, never needing to say my name again, I received the letter from Evergreen High School on a quiet Monday morning. It came in a hand-addressed envelope, thick paper, no printed logo, none of the formal templates that usually accompany institutional correspondence. In the top left corner, a student's handwriting read Class 9A, Local Heritage Project. Inside was a handwritten invitation, shaky in form, but sincere in voice. Dear Mr. Nathan, our teacher asked us to choose a place in the neighborhood that holds community memory. We didn't want to pick the library or the bronze statue in the park. They're too obvious. We want to do our project on your house, the one with the flagpole and the wooden sign. Mrs. Lydia told us the story in class. We listened and we debated about it for a long time. If you agree, we'd just like to stand in the yard and ask you a few questions. We'll record and write everything ourselves. We promise not to make you uncomfortable. I read that letter under the eaves of my house, my hand resting on the same piece of wood where I once carved the first line after the destruction. This is the house of a soldier. I didn't hesitate. I wrote back also by hand. I don't give you permission to rewrite anything. I only invite you to come if you're ready to write it in your own words. 2 days later, 15 students arrived. Some carried notebooks, some cameras. One brought only a pencil and a bag of sunflower seeds. Their teacher said little, just 3 questions scribbled on a large pad. Why is this place worthy of being called heritage? Who has the right to preserve a memory? Who are we doing this for? I didn't answer. I simply stood in the yard pointing at the flagpole, the fragment of wall still standing. The wooden box where strangers had once left letters, medals, bullet casings, apologies. I told them about my grandfather at Normandy, my father in Vietnam, myself in Kandahar, but not through stories of valor. I told them through broken objects from the day the bulldozer came, through the bent corner of a family photo, through the window frame I once leaned against watching my son learn to walk. At the end, I said, if you think this is just a school project, don't pick this place. But if you understand that its silence is what needs to be preserved, then you're redrawing a map that doesn't need Google's confirmation. A shy girl raised her hand. Do we need your permission to tell this story? I shook my head. Memory doesn't ask permission to exist. As long as you don't distort it, it will live on whether I'm here or not. The following week, the school held a small exhibit. No banners, no spotlight. Just an empty room with hand-drawn sketches, shaky videos, and a sign that read, "The house that didn't need to be rebuilt, just remembered properly." Inside that room was a map of my home. There were quotes, ones I never actually said, but they had written, "A soldier doesn't need a fortress, they just need a flagpole, and a few people willing to stand beneath it." I stood in the corner of the room watching the kids guide visitors past each photo. No one said my name. No one pointed and whispered, "That's Mr. Nathan." But I knew in every eye that paused before the image of my grandfather saluting a pile of broken bricks, in every breath held as Lydia's voice played. Describing her father, they proved one thing. This wasn't a school project anymore. It was memory being protected by those who were born after it. The memorial took place on a Sunday afternoon at Evergreen's Central Square. No elaborate decorations, no large stage, no booming loudspeakers from above. Just a small wooden platform, a row of flags rising alongside the red-turning maple trees, and a long name board on a bamboo frame etched with the names of service members who had lived in Evergreen Hills over the past 100 years. I arrived early, wore my dress uniform. No medals, brought nothing with me but the old flag, the same flag my father carried home from war, once flown above our porch, and the one I raised again. After the bulldozers flattened our home, I didn't plan to speak. I only wanted to stand in the back to the right of the guest seating, a spot people rarely notice. But as I stepped into the square, a girl, likely a volunteer, ran up to me with a list in hand, whispering, "Mr. Nathan, right? Mrs. Lydia said we saved a third-row seat for you." I smiled, nodded, but I still chose to stand along the edge. I didn't want to sit among others like a symbol. I just wanted to be present as one of the living, remembering those who weren't it. The ceremony opened with a minute of silence. Then Lydia stepped up, speaking as a representative for the community's veterans. She didn't talk politics, didn't mention anyone's mistakes. She simply said, "I once saw a man rebuild a flagpole, not to fly anything high, but to keep hold of an honor that had been forgotten. And I believe every neighborhood should have at least one place where someone can stop and ask, 'Who once held this space for me?'" Then she stepped down. After that, a pastor read the names of fallen soldiers. No background music, no crying, just wind threading through the flags and the steady tap of shoes on stone. I stood with my head bowed. But from the corner of my eye, I saw a familiar figure approach the front, holding a small wooden box. It was Mr. Max Vernon, head of the HOA gray suit. No tie. His gaze no longer carried the arrogance it had when I first walked into his office holding the property deed. He didn't say a word. He placed the box gently on the platform beside the name board, lifted the lid. Inside was the brass nameplate that once hung at the front of my house price residence, established 1948. He left it there, turned and gave a military-style salute, though he had never served, then walked back to his seat. No applause, no one called his name. But I saw Lydia's eyes shine with tears, and I gave a small nod. Not to forgive, but to acknowledge some wrongs don't need apologies. They just need to be met with the right action at the right time without asking to be forgiven. The ceremony ended. People left slowly. I stayed behind, approaching the name board. Next to the brass plate from my home was a newly etched line. This was once home to 3 generations of service members and still remains a place where they are remembered. I don't know who carved that, but I don't need to. I only know that I can walk home tonight, step back into that bare yard, and no longer carry the weight of having to hold everything on my own. Because I've seen the one thing I've hoped for all along. Someone else stepped forward to hold it too quietly, steadily, and long enough so memory won't be buried again. After that memorial service, I received more than 24 messages, offers, and even sketches from people willing to help me rebuild the house. Some were civil engineers, some were old comrades. Some were architecture students who said they wanted to rebuild a symbol using modern materials, but keep the old soul intact. I was grateful, truly. But then I realized if I rebuilt that house, I wouldn't just be filling in an empty plot of land. I'd be unintentionally erasing a space that had become a place for memory to stand, a place people had stepped into, sat down within, and exhaled softly. So I carved a small sign. Pinewood, hand-chiseled letters. This place will not be rebuilt with walls. It will be a place where people do not need permission to remember someone. I placed it next to the flagpole, then walked into town to find an old carpentry shop. I'd once heard my grandfather mention. The owner was an elderly Mexican gentleman, once a church pew maker for the local parish. I commissioned him to make 15 wooden chairs. Low, no armrests, unpainted. They were delivered within 3 days. I arranged them in a circle around an open space once the living room, now just earth. And scattered bricks. In the center of that circle, I laid a flat stone. Etched on its face were the words, "Sit down, you don't need to say anything. Just keep what's right, present." I didn't promote it, sent no invitations. But the next morning, an elder from the neighborhood came and sat, then a young woman with a camera, then 2 kids playing marbles near the flagpole. And on the 3rd day, someone brought an old letter, a handwritten note from his grandfather, who'd served in the same division as my father, and placed it inside a hollow in the stone. Then, left without a word, I named the place the Held Quiet. Not a park, not a memorial, just a place anyone could step into. Not because they were allowed, but because it had once been held up by something no one had the right to call small sacrifice. One day, Lydia came by bringing 2 of her students. She asked, "Can I use this space for a history lesson?" I nodded. "As long as no one is forced to speak." She smiled. Her students sat in a loose circle and wrote in their notebooks. They didn't record facts. They wrote feelings. One girl wrote, "No one has ever taught me about war, but here I know someone once held this seat." With their silence, I read that line over her shoulder and felt no need to build anything more. Because I understood I had preserved the only thing that can multiply without bricks or blueprints. Quiet empathy. I never advertised. The Held Quiet, but somehow word spread. Not through newspapers, through stories. People didn't send links, they simply whispered. There's a place in Evergreen Hills where you don't have to say anything and still feel your heart return to you. I didn't care whether that was true or not. I only knew this. Each day, more people came. One day I counted 8 people sitting around the stone in the yard. No one looked at each other. No one asked where the others were from, but no one left early. Some brought things: a letter, a medal, an empty shell casing a red scarf, an old photo, and left them. I didn't tidy, didn't arrange. I let them lie there like winds that had chosen the right direction. Then one late afternoon, as the rain fell lightly, I saw an old man standing at the gate. He didn't ring the bell, didn't call my name, just stood there in a felt hat with a wooden cane, wearing an old military jacket with a name patch so worn, only one letter remained. I nodded to him. He nodded back. I opened the gate. He didn't ask permission. He didn't need to. He walked in as if he had once stood there before. He moved slowly, looking around, paused at the flagpole, stood in silence for 3 full minutes. Then he approached the stone in the center. He didn't sit. He just opened the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out something wrapped in deep blue velvet. He laid it down right beside the other offerings left by strangers and stepped back like a man saluting a comrade one last time. Then he turned, left the yard, and disappeared down the street without saying a word. I didn't ask his name, but when he turned the corner, I approached and opened the velvet pouch. Inside was a dog tag, weathered, dulled with age. On its back, a single line had been hand-etched. They didn't get to come home, so I carried home with me. I didn't know who he was, but I knew what he left wasn't meant for me. It was for those who never found rest, who never had a grave, who were never named in everyday life. And he, the one who survived, had carried them through the years until he found a place where he could finally set them down and know they would not be forgotten. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the yard, wine curling around my ears, leaves brushing softly against the flagpole. I didn't write anything new on the wooden board, but quietly I carved one line into the stone beside the dog tag. Someone came here to lay someone else down. They both deserved to be remembered. And I understood from that moment on, the Held Quiet was no longer just part of Evergreen Hills. It was a place anyone could bring the part of themselves they didn't know where else to send. No explanation needed, no fences required, just sit down and let the rest speak on its own. I always sat at the edge. In the military, a commander doesn't sit in the middle of the table, they sit it where they can see everyone without blocking anyone's view. When I came home, I kept that habit, stand nearby. Support quietly, keep the flame alive. But one Saturday afternoon, with the sun slanting through the trees and the courtyard quieter than usual, I saw every chair was empty. For the first time since I placed them, I walked to the one in the center, facing the stone beside the flagpole. I sat down. No one around me, no one waiting for a story, and no one needing me to hold anything anymore. I opened my brown leather notebook, the same one where I wrote the first sentence after my house was torn down. They didn't ask me before they destroyed it, but I will ask them back by choosing to hold on. For more than a year, I wrote in that book every thought, every line, every story I couldn't speak aloud to anyone. I wrote about my grandfather, who saluted the flag in front of a pile of rubble. About Lydia, who stood before a council to say one sentence for her father. About the child who asked me, "What is a soldier?" and the old man who left behind his dog tag as if laying down a handful of earth for someone who never had a grave. But today I knew it was time to stop. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because I was no longer the only one carrying this story. I placed the notebook on my lap, flipped to the last page. My hand trembled not from emotion, but from knowing that writing the final line is never a simple act. I breathed deep, and with a steady, slow pen, I wrote, "When people no longer ask my name but still remember why this flag stands, I know I can finally sit not to write more, but to set the pen down at the right moment." I closed the notebook. Didn't lock it, didn't hide it. I placed it into the crevice of the stone between the circle of chairs where others had once left letters, medals, scraps of old fabric. I don't expect anyone to open it. But if someone respects it enough to do so, Shawnee, trust they'll understand this notebook isn't a manual. It's a reminder. I stood up, didn't look back. But as I reached the flagpole, I raised my hand in salute, not out of protocol, but as a quiet thank you. Thank you, old house. Thank you, open yard. Thank you. Chairs worn, but never broken. And then I stepped out of the held quiet, leaving behind not just chairs, boards, stone, or flag, but a space in the truest sense. A place where anyone could walk in, sit down, and hold on to what's right without needing anyone's permission. A week after I wrote the final line in my notebook and quietly stepped away from the held quiet, I received a letter in the mail, a blue envelope addressed in shaky handwriting, like someone still learning how to hold a pen. No sender's name, just a line on the front to the person who kept the quiet seat. I opened it. Inside was a sheet of lined student paper, no school logo, no formal header, just a short handwritten note. Its childish scrawl so honest it stung. "My name is Max. I'm in 5th grade. I don't know what war is." But my dad cried when he saw the picture of the old man saluting the broken house. I'd never seen him cry before. I don't have anything to bring there. But if it's okay, I'd like to leave a question in the middle of those chairs. I promise I won't make noise. I'll just leave it and go. My question is, how do we grow up without forgetting the things we've never seen? I set the letter on the table. My heartbeat slowed. I've read many tributes. I've heard apologies, acknowledgments, thank yous. But no one had ever asked to leave a question, and no one had ever named memory as something you could forget, even if you'd never lived it. I stepped into the yard. The flagpole still stood. The chairs were still there. The wind still moved, but something had shifted, not because I had stepped back, but because the space was now ready for a new kind of holding. Not just a place to look back, but a place to keep asking forward. I didn't write Max back. Instead, I returned to the circle of chairs. Pono pulled out a fresh wooden plaque and carved these words. "From today onward, this is a place where anyone may leave a question as long as it is asked with full respect and in silence." I placed the plaque beside the old notebook, now faded at the edges. Then I sat down in the chair across from the stone. In my hand was a blank slip of paper. I wrote Max's question, word for word. No corrections, no edits. Then I folded it and placed it at the very center of the stone. When I stood, I no longer felt like a keeper. I was a handoff, and I knew from here on, the held quiet would no longer need someone in the middle. It would only need someone brave enough to bow their head before a question, and that alone would be enough for memory to remain. I didn't return to the held quiet for over a month, not because I forgot, and certainly not because I was tired of it, but because I had seen it had enough life to carry on without me, sitting in the middle adjusting things, or reminding anyone of anything I spent my time reading. Watering the garden, writing a few quiet lines just for myself. No telling, no sharing. But one morning in April, with the sun still gentle and the sky not quite blue, yet I stepped out of the house and walked slowly toward the old lot. I brought nothing with me except a warm cup of tea and a pair of eyes soft enough to look at what once hurt without flinching. Anymore, I walked through the weathered wooden gate, and the first thing I saw wasn't the chairs or the flagpole or the center stone. It was people, 7 of them, each in their own way. An elderly woman knitting a scarf, occasionally looking up like she could hear something on the wind. A middle-aged man with an old journal in front of him, not open, just placed there. A girl, maybe 10, writing on a small slip of paper, walking in a circle as if searching for the right place to leave it. I didn't step in. I walked the stone path around the far side of the center stone, the spot where I once sat to write the final line in my notebook. There I noticed a new wooden box. Someone had built another. Not large, but inside folded notes full. I pulled one out. In purple ink, it read, "I never met you, Grandpa. But if you ever sat here, I think you'd like this, quiet." I folded it back up, returned it to the box, then sat on a chair at the edge of the circle, the same spot I used to choose in the early days when everything was still rubble. No one looked at me. No one recognized me as the one who built this place. And that to me was exactly right, because I knew if I still needed to be seen, I hadn't really let anything go. A while later, the young girl returned to the center stone. She pulled from her pocket a single button, old, threadbare. She placed it next to the dog tag that's been there for over a year now. Then stepped back, bowed low. No one asked whose button it was. No one asked who she was, but I knew this place still functioned, just as it did on day one. Each object placed a piece of memory, once misplaced, now returned to where it belongs. I finished my tea. The sun shifted overhead. I stood, didn't fix anything, didn't straighten chairs, didn't write on the board. I just looked back. Not to make sure it was okay, but to whisper to myself, it doesn't need me to stay right anymore. Then I walked away through the gate, didn't look back, and no one called after me. I sat back at the old wooden desk after weeks of not opening a single drawer. The tea in the pot was still there, the ink in the pen still full. I opened a new notebook. Not the old brown leather one, but a soft white paperback, unwritten. No logo, no introduction. I didn't intend to write much. Just one passage. One time I knew clearly that no one needed to read it later. But I also knew if I didn't write it down, some part of this memory would drift away without anyone ever knowing where it paused. I wrote, the place that used to be my home then became rubble, then became an empty space, has finally become something I never thought could be built by hand. A place where people dare to sit down without asking permission and leave behind something they never dared say anywhere else. I paused. Took a long breath, not because I was emotional, but because my chest felt light. I continued. I no longer keep anything there. I'm not the caretaker. I'm not the gatekeeper. If you come and find peace there, it means someone has kept it for me. If you come and find a strange object, don't move it. Look at it. It might be something someone once believed they weren't brave enough to keep for themselves. I closed the notebook. Didn't sign it, didn't date it. I simply taped a small slip of paper to the inside cover. To whoever opens this, don't retell my story. Tell yours if this place reminds you of anything worth remembering. I stood, carried the notebook outside, walked slowly back to the held quiet. The wooden gate was still there, the seats still worn, leaves falling with the season. On the center stone were a few new items, a shirt, button, a broken necklace, and a small pencil-written note. I haven't forgiven myself yet, but here I'm not turned away. I placed the new notebook into the wooden box nearby. No label, no sign saying journal. I knew if someone needed it, they would know to open it. I walked home through the gate. For the last time, I ran my hand gently along the fence that once blocked the path. To my old house, I said nothing out loud, but in my heart, I thought I didn't build anything new. But if this place continues to live, it means I kept what was most worth keeping, the right for others to place their memories back down in their own hands, with their own spelling mistakes, and with the questions no one answered at. I went home. Didn't boil tea. I opened the window. The breeze came in. No one knocks anymore. No one asks to visit the place I kept because that place is already theirs. Thank you for following the entire story. If any part of this journey spoke to you, please like the video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next stories where memory will always have a place to sit and stay.